Hi, I'm Christian, this is Crowland Publishing, and it's October, so it's Spooky Halloween month. Now, I'm Australian, we don't really celebrate Halloween very much, but we should, because it's fun, so I will. So this is the first of a few videos I'm going to make about horror themes in D&D. And the best place to start is the Warlock. So Warlocks have some of the richest, scariest lore in D&D. Because clerics serve their gods, they go to the temple, they learn the sacred rites, those spells. Paladins are often picked out for their bravery and moral courage and given powers. That's a paladin. But warlocks have a much more potentially adversarial relationship with their patron. And they allow you to introduce PCs that are morally compromised, scary, on the edge, but aren't necessarily evil and don't necessarily serve their warlock patrons. And just having these character classes in the world indicate that there are dangerous, often unambiguously evil entities, gods, spirits, devils, whatever, in the game world. So let's look at some patrons from fiction and see what we can learn about what makes a good narrative and a good scary narrative revolving around these patrons. First up is the Bane from the Last Apprentice series. I don't read young adult fiction very much, but these are great. They'd be my favourite if I'd read them as a kid. They're the folk horror influenced series about the apprentice to the local hunter of ghosts and witches and monsters, whose title is The Spook. And in all these books, the best character is Alice, and she is the daughter of witches. She's not quite evil yet, but she's very, very tempted. And the Bane is an ancient horror that the spook couldn't kill, so he imprisoned him in tunnels below the local cathedral. And during the novel, Alice does a desperate deal with this spiritual horror that's desperate to get out from behind the gate it's imprisoned by and recreate its body. And it says to her, "I'll give you my power, and you can call on me 3 times, but the 3rd time, that's it, you must serve me." And of course, she's a witch. She wants to do this. Part of her is very, very tempted by it. And so this is a fantastic example, not only of a patron as dangerously close. Like, she does eventually meet this thing. You can go down the tunnel and touch it and shove it, play cards with it. But it's also actively antagonistic towards her. It resents having to work with women. It's a very, very sexist monster. Great book, great baddie. Number 2 is drugs. There is a long history of people in fantasy literature who gain powers from drugs, from shooting it up, snorting it, drinking it, whatever. Captain America, Elric of Melniboné, Bane the Batman villain, vampires feed on blood to survive. Decadent literature often has psychic breakthroughs being done with drugs. H.P. Lovecraft, you take the right drug, you can see through time and travel to other planets. And Snowflame, the DC supervillain who takes some sort of evil cocaine and that becomes his god and that gives him superpowers, which is what happens to most of us. So what if your warlock patron is a drug or a substance that you were forced to ingest? Now, what makes this a warlock pact is that you don't necessarily have easy access to the drug. What makes it potentially a horror-themed element of the game is that you desperately need it. You crave it. You will be sick and die without it. You must steal it. You must do anything that you can to gain access to this drug. What happens if you don't have it? What will you do? And then you are ultimately addicted to the patron's power, and the power is eventually going to burn you out and kill you. That is a good horror story. I need this to live. It will kill me. And you want to scare a warlock in a story like this? Steal their stash. Transporting with elves. Number 3 is Unicron, or Galactus. They're the same character. Unicron is a monstrous planet-eating deity from the dawn of time in the Transformers universe. Galactus is a monstrous planet-eating deity from the dawn of time in the Marvel universe. The only real difference between these two, basically the exact same character, is that Unicron is a lot more actively malevolent, and every now and again Galactus gets a speech where he goes, "I know I've killed untold trillions, but one day I think it will all be worth it." And they also have a gimmick where they take their servants and they physically transform them. Megatron turns into Galvatron. Norrinrad turns into the Silver Surfer. So what did your Warlock PC start out as to be physically transformed, as we see in Unicron and Galactus? Were they diseased? Were they physically disabled? Or maybe what did they have to give up to become the herald of the Unicron or Galactus? Did they need to give up their beauty? Did they need to give up their race? Maybe they weren't even a human or an elf or whatever to start off with. Maybe this PC was a monster, or a tree, or a green slime. So what happens if you fail the patron? What will happen to your physical body? And this is the time to introduce real body horror elements into your game. Because if you mess up and the warlock goes, "Okay, I'm not into you, you need to be punished," suddenly you are going through a horrific, donkey from Pinocchio kind of sequence where you're physically, painfully transformed into something that you desperately did not want to be. And the final element that these two creatures share, Galvatron and Unicron, is that you do deals with them to prevent your world being eaten. That's the storyline for both of the two characters. So what does your patron, who you're using as a Unicron and Galvatron as a basis for, want to eat? Maybe the world is a bit much, but maybe it's something that is extremely precious to the Warlock and to the Warlock's friends. And the patron wants to feast upon it, to glut itself upon this precious, precious thing. That's a horror story. Number 4 is The Gun from The Half-Made World, Felix Gilman's fantastic secondary world kind of Western fantasy. So it is a fantasy world, but it looks like a Western. Fantastic book. Anyway, the world has two warring factions at play in the frontier, two supernatural forces who work against each other. The Line, who are a cult of people who receive information from somewhere that gives them ecology-destroying industry. They learn how to build things like trains and buildings and much more potentially powerful steampunk-looking industry. And the Gun, who seem to be a bunch of demons who incarnate in the form of guns. And they don't care about humans. They just want to be wielded. They just want to kill and they just want to fight the Line. Now, there are already examples of Warlock PCs who serve weapons within the game. You can just reimagine the Gun easily as a weapon chain, weapon pact, whatever it is, Warlock. That's fine. Just call it the sword if you don't want to use a gun. Now, the problem though where it becomes horrific is that this is a weapon. It wants to kill. And it's going to kill whoever it perceives as its enemies. And you are going to be forced into making decisions where you need to do violence on people who you intellectually might understand do not need having violence done upon them. And your allegiance to the weapon, your allegiance to causing death for something that does not care about humanity. And also you have the fun possibility of the patron is literally in your pockets at all times. It knows immediately what you do. You can't hide from it. You can't rely on it for being ignorant. You constantly are being monitored by this entity that does not care about you and does not care about your friends and will put you into danger and kill you so long as you kill its enemies. And number 5 is the devil, like the actual lord of evil in all the world. Now in fantasy literature and games and stuff, dark gods are common. Devils and demons are always threatening the universe and breaking down the walls of reality. But how people experience the devil as an evil god in medieval Western Europe historically is a lot more playful than you might imagine. The poor and the desperate and the heartbroken, they serve the devil and make pacts with him all the time. And in folklore, they're not just evil, they're often audacious or desperate, and they win. This is a story about the social order being upturned, about the lowest getting the best of the most high. There's a whole body of folktales about chances, just about the character called Jack, who actively courts the devil and tricks him and wins and gets his powers. This is the Rake of the Gates of Hell, John Constantine. Hellboy fans and Catholics alike will remember the story of St. Dunstan, who takes the devil and locks him in an iron box. This is the story of a warlock who has defeated their patron, which is, I think, a pretty interesting and solid hook for a warlock PC. What makes it horrific is that you've got to carry the jail of this perhaps even cosmic entity around with you. And it wants to get out, and it wants to get revenge on you. That's horror. Now, why you can outwit it and outplay it, you already did once. Nevertheless, it is a terrible cosmic being that wishes you specifically very, very great harm. And it's going to get out sooner or later. So, let's get 5 adventure seeds from these various kinds of patrons. Number 1, the patron can and will operate on the material world 3 times or 5 times or once or whatever for the warlock. I will kill the dragon. I will defeat the Chaos Marines. I will destroy the gate. And the patron needs to act like this is a great thing for both of them. Let me in. I will give you the power. Let me in and I will change the world. But the final time, well, that patron is then going to be free of the contract. It's not going to need the warlock anymore. So something much worse than death is going to happen if the warlock says yes the 3rd time. And encourage the other PCs to get on the act. Do it now. We have to. That dragon is worse than your patron. No, Gregor, it is not worth your soul. Nice and dramatic, nice and exciting. And more importantly is that if you give a PC a chance to destructively and narratively and dramatically destroy themselves, a lot of the time they're going to take it, and it's pretty funny. Number 2, going back to the idea of a patron as something as that you were addicted to or as a drug. What happens if you generally do lose your access to the warlock powers? Do you lose them and become a level 0 NPC or whatever? Will you have over-the-top hallucinations like that terrible episode of Buffy and go to magical crack houses looking for more powers? Will you become Bubbles from The Wire with magic? All right, that's fine. That's fun. Everyone likes to go and act out like all crazy, I am addicted. But what happens when a worse patron makes themselves available to the Warlock? Look who has abandoned you. I can help you now. Number 3, your patron is looking for something to feast upon. Or maybe needs to control it or destroy it. Something that most people consider good as well. Maybe the Warlock patron wants to eat a sleeping goddess's head. Maybe they want to drink the blood of the last unicorn. Or they want to control the good Queen Bess. Will your Warlock, when the time comes, side with the patron? Or risk losing it all? What happens when the adventure starts out with, your patron comes down and says, the adventuring team should serve you. I want you to be my Darth Vader, and these are all going to be elite stormtroopers in your army. How's the Warlock going to react to that? How are the PCs? Number 5. So you've got an enemy Warlock, and this Warlock is simply beyond the party's power level right now. She's level 15, you're level 5, something like that. A violent confrontation will just end in absolute total party kill. But somewhere along the way, the PCs find out that the 10-foot-tall devil woman with iron hooves was once just the tiny hermit Bill, and before he made this particularly fantastic Warlock pact, he was just staving off rickets and skin infections. So if you want to defeat whatever Bill became, you can't just stab her. You need to somehow break the pact. You need to return her to her true form. But how? Well, that's the adventure. So there we go. 5 horror-themed Warlock patrons, 5 horror-themed adventures. This was a really fun one to do. I could do 5 more. I didn't even get to Bob from Twin Peaks. I love Warlocks.